Alrighty, chat. So today we are reacting to a great YouTube channel that I have come to love, and that is Did You Know Gaming. They do a lot of gaming news, gaming facts videos, and the one I got loaded up here is Every Zelda Game America Never Got. Now, I'm a pretty big Zelda fan. Wind Waker was my game that got me started on the Zelda train. I love Zelda games, especially the handheld ones, but Wind Waker is my favorite console version from the GameCube, and it should be interesting to see what kind of games that I never got to see. Maybe there's some versions of American Zelda games that are different. Who knows? But we're gonna find out here in this video. Let's go, chat.
Did you know there's several games in the Legend of Zelda series which never saw a release in the United States? In some cases, the reasons for these games' lack of localization is quite apparent, while the lack of localization for some other titles is nothing short of baffling. Regardless of the reasons, all these games expand the Zelda universe in ways that many won't have known about. There's 6 games to cover across the Super Nintendo, GameCube, and even the Nintendo DS. But we're starting with 2 Japanese Zelda titles which released on Nintendo's Satellaview add-on, which were never re-released, and as a result, are only playable thanks to a dedicated fan community.
You could play it on that thing?
Thanks to a dedicated fan community.
What?
The first of these titles we're exploring is BS Zelda no Densetsu, known in English simply as BS for Legend of Zelda. BS Zelda is a fully fledged remake of the original NES The Legend of Zelda from 1986. With BS Zelda being on the Super Nintendo, the game's graphics were recreated within 16-bit limitations.
What? We didn't get that?
The game still plays very similarly to the original release, but with a few changes, both minor and major. A few examples are that the Super Nintendo's L and R buttons allow the player to switch between items on the fly, and the maximum number of rupees is increased from 255 to 999.
Why did we not get this? That's
also
amazing.
made to the game's map, with the overworld actually being smaller and the game's dungeon layouts being completely different. These changes have caused many fans to refer to the title as a third quest for The Legend of Zelda, as the original had a second quest that was unlocked after beating the game. As we mentioned earlier, this game was only playable on the Satellaview, and made use of a narrator to provide hints and tips at certain points of the livestream.
That's cool.
This narrator is alleged to be the Old Man from the start of the game. 2 versions of BS Zelda were broadcast. Between August 9th and August 30th in 1995, the initial Third Quest version was streamed via Satellaview. However, in December of 1996, a version featuring a different world was broadcast. This is often referred to as the Map 2 version of the game, or the Fourth Quest. Due to the game being streamed to players, it had to be played in real time. As a result, events would occur at certain points during a broadcast, such as killing all enemies on screen or giving the player an unlimited quantity of a particular item. The game was streamed in 4 weekly installments, and players had to tune in at those times if they wanted to play. Another feature of the Fourth Quest is that players actually do not take control of Link. Instead, the title makes use of the Satellaview's mascots. These are a red-headed girl and a boy with a baseball cap.
This was all the way back during Super Nintendo era. This was happening. You had to tune in live, like a live stream, like Twitch. What?
Player's name and gender were determined by the user's settings on the Satellaview and loaded into the game. This is the first time a Nintendo-developed Zelda game would feature a female protagonist. Prior to this release, the only Zelda games to have a playable female character were the CDI titles by Philips, and we all know how good they were. This playable character is known as the Hero of Light, a character that would be explored more in the next game we'll be looking at, BS The Legend of Zelda Ancient Stone Tablets. Broadcast in 1997, BS The Legend of Zelda Ancient Stone Tablets made use of the Super Nintendo's Link to the Past engine, once again putting the player in the shoes of the Hero of Light. a number of changes were made to the game's mechanics, such as being able to change direction while using the Pegasus boots. This change was possibly inspired by the ability to change direction while running in Marvelous, Another Treasure Island by A.G.R.
Marvelous.
But
Never
we'll be
heard of
talking
it.
more about that game later.
Huh.
Ancient Stone Tablets is often seen as a sort of second quest for A Link to the Past, as many elements from A Link to the Past were reused and rearranged to create an original release. The only difference to most standard second quests within the Zelda series is that Ancient Stone Tablets actually features its own unique storyline. The game's story takes place 6 years after Link defeated Ganon in A Link to the Past.
6 years
While the
after
kingdom
Link
is
to
at
the
peace,
Past.
Princess Zelda has a recurring dream of a shadow over a temple. When a mysterious light appears in the east of Hyrule, both Zelda and Sahasrarla's younger brother, Aganar, go to investigate. They find a young child lying on the ground, and take the youth to Sahasrarla's hideout near the Eastern Palace, where Aganar now resides. Because of the young hero's clothing, they believe that the child may not be from Hyrule at all. Zelda learns that Sahasrarla has left the land to seek out Link, who left after defeating Ganon years before. Sensing courage within the child, Zelda believes that they could be the hero of light. We won't go too in-depth with the game's plot for those wanting to play the game themselves. That said, the hero sets forth on a quest to retrieve ancient stone tablets in order to learn more on the impending evil. At the start of the game, the player has no weapon. Instead, prior to obtaining a sword and shield from the Eastern Palace, a golden bee in a bottle can be used to protect the player.
What?
When let loose, the bee will attack any monsters the hero encounters, but will run from those who wield a blade. Also given
That's
to the
kinda
player
cool.
is a bug-catching net and an ocarina, which can be used to return to the entrance of a dungeon. The game is set up over a timeline of 4 real-world weeks. Each week, an hour-long broadcast would be made, similar to that of a serialized story. And every week, the player would have a total of about 50 minutes to complete 2 dungeons, as
Really?
well as explore Hyrule in search of secrets and bonuses. After the time limit is over, the player's progress would be saved regardless of their position in the game. Progress would be carried over to each session, and players would keep any obtained tablets, items, and rupees. Rather than allow players to complete unfinished dungeons from the previous week, a thief stands at the entrance of the dungeon and would supply the hero with any treasures that they had found within said dungeon.
Thief.
The narrator from BS Zelda also makes a return in the game, but Aganar and Princess Zelda will also speak to the player through telepathy. Their dialogue comes in the form of voice acting and informs the player as well as advances the game's plot. The game also has timed events, which can change the weather to rain or fog, and introduce Zora enemies, as well as give players temporary powers.
That's cool.
Some timed story events can also occur, such as the player having to save Zelda from Octoroks, or helping the Sanctuary Sage from drowning in a lake. The game was only ever broadcast twice, and was impossible to boot outside of the designated broadcast time, resulting in it being impossible to play without emulation.
Dang.
As the narration was broadcast to the player live and not stored locally, there's no way to emulate the game's voice acting and orchestral soundtrack without the original audio. While not considered part of the Zelda canon, Ancient Stone Tablets is the first time in which Zelda is shown predicting future events through her dreams. It also marks the first time in which Zelda's voice was ever heard. The game's plot also takes place 6 years after the events of A Link to the Past, the same period of time between the release of both games in Japan. Ancient Stone Tablets also mark the first time in which non-playable characters would move around the world and change behavior depending on the game's time, a feature used extensively in Majora's Mask. The term Hero of Light would also be featured in Four Swords Adventures, and is given to whoever is deemed most helpful during the multiplayer mode of Hyrulean Adventure. The BS Zelda titles are both impossible to play without the use of emulation. ROM files of the games can be found on the BS Zelda homepage, which was created in 1999 and is still maintained by Con. The site archives all releases of the games, as well as all patches that are available for the titles. These patches can range from changing sprites to be Link during gameplay, to attempting to recreate the full original broadcast quality of the titles.
That's
Of course, these games never saw a release in America, but they were also only available for a very limited time in Japan. In 1999, Nintendo broke its partnership with broadcaster St. Giga, who controlled the service, and due to a dispute with the radio station, the service was terminated in the year 2000.
Dang.
The Satellaview, or some variant of it, may have been considered for the international market at some point. Regional variations of the Super Nintendo all had expansion ports used by the Satellaview on their underside, making it possible to utilize a similar device. However, there were no equivalent services to St. Giga that operated outside of Japan. This would have made it difficult to get a similar service working in the West. Audio or radio dramas are also extremely popular in Japan, meaning the streams were tailored for a Japanese audience. In fact, many games feature audio drama adaptations. Along with the cultural differences, the need to find voice actors for English releases would have been costly, making the investment of localizing the games an even bigger risk. But before we cover even more Japan-only Zelda games, a word from this episode's sponsor, Buyee. If you've ever used American sites to buy things from Japan, you've probably noticed how much sellers jack up the price. It can be a lot. This is where Buyee comes in. Buyee is a service that places orders or bids on your behalf on Japanese shopping and auction sites, then ships the items straight to you without any absurd price hikes. This includes, to get to the Zelda title we're most eager to talk about, we'd be doing this video a disservice if we didn't bring up a collection of DS Zelda games that never came to America. Tingle, a bizarre little guy who first appeared in Majora's Mask, divided audiences with his strange characteristics.
That's for
however,
sure.
didn't stop him having a number of games specifically following his exploits. His first solo adventure didn't come in a particularly unique form, nor as a massive release, being a game that was only made available as a reward from Club Nintendo in Japan. Released in 2007, Tingle's Balloon Fight DS was a remake of the original Balloon Fight for the NES, with Tingle taking the role of the main playable character. The game featured 3 modes labeled A, B, and C, with Mode A being a recreation of the original Balloon Fight's arcade format, 99 stages which loop upon completion. Mode B was a multiplayer mode which made use of the DS download play feature so that multiple people could play through just a single cartridge, providing a fairly simple competitive balloon fight for up to 4 players.
So ridiculous.
Mode C is simply Balloon Trip, which sets Tingle across a set of side-scrolling stages as he navigates around various obstacles whilst attempting to collect rupees along the way. This was most likely created as a means of promoting another Tingle title that had been released shortly before, freshly picked Tingle's Rosy Rupee Land. Released on Nintendo DS in Japan in 2006 and Europe in 2007, and developed by Vanpool, the game follows Tingle and his transformation from an average Joe middle-aged man into a green-garbed fairy. In the game, Tingle starts to hear voices which guide him to a spring nearby his house, where he meets Uncle Rupee. Uncle Rupee is an older-looking man with a giant rupee for a head, who offers Tingle the chance to live out his days in a paradise known as Rupee Land, so long as he continues to throw rupees into the pool. With more and more rupees being offered to Uncle Rupee, a tower from beneath the water will begin to rise toward the sky, allowing Tingle to enter Rupee Land. By accepting Uncle Rupee's offer, he is changed, with rupees becoming his sole source of life. The game's events take place across 3 continents with a total of 11 differently themed islands, each containing a dungeon or puzzle that must be solved. The main goal of the game is to make the tower in the spring reach Rupee Land, with the gameplay centering around collecting as much money as possible. On top of this, the player must barter with a variety of NPCs to obtain both information and items, costing what the player must deem to be a reasonable price. Paying too little will provide the player with nothing, but paying too much will needlessly inflate how much they need to let go. This is likely the most bizarre element to the game, with so many people asking you to determine what is believed to be a fair price in certain scenarios. Defeating bosses and completing dungeons not only provides substantial rupee payouts, but also rewards the player with 1 of 5 gemstones, with all 5 needing to be obtained to complete the game. As the tower grows, more areas are unlocked at certain heights, leading to a continual need to donate money in order to progress. Items can also be obtained and sold on Tingle's adventure, or they can be used to aid other characters. Items can sometimes be combined to create new variations in a boiling pot at Tingle's house. There's also decorative items that can be used to adorn the top floor of Tingle's home. While exploring, the DS's top screen acts as a map, but maps must first be discovered, and even then, they are not complete. The game has the player circle landmarks on their maps, encouraging the player to explore all of a map's area. Once completed, the player can of course keep hold of their map, or they can sell it to the map maker for rupees, meaning that the player will no longer have a map for certain areas should they return to them. Seeing as Tingle is very much not a fighter, combat is peculiar in this game. Tingle initiates battles by walking into enemies, creating a large dust cloud. By tapping on the cloud with the stylus, Tingle beats his opponents more quickly. But it's also possible to move during combat to add more enemies into the mix. By increasing the number of enemies in a battle, rewards are increased exponentially, but it also increases how quickly Tingle is hurt. As Tingle's life force is directly attached to his rupees, damage simply depletes the player's rupee count the longer a battle goes on for. To assist in combat and puzzles throughout the game, Tingle can hire several supporting characters into his party in the form of bodyguards.
This is
Bodyguards
such a ridiculous
all have
idea
varying
for a
stats
game.
and uses, and not only assist in combat, but are necessary to solve certain puzzles throughout the game. These characters are controlled by dragging them with the stylus, while Tingle is controlled with the system's buttons. Tingle is also aided by another fairy in his quest, known as Pinkle, who provides hints and tips along the adventure.
Hi,
Though
Pinkle.
not necessarily accepted as canon.
Okay, maybe
within
this
the
game isn't
Zelda
so bad.
universe, Tingle's Rosy Rupee Land explains a fair amount about who Tingle is in the world of Hyrule. Tingle is actually not a person specifically, but rather a state of being, capable of falling upon any living thing.
A state of
The game
being?
requires you to name your character, not allowing the name Tingle to be used at all. The name Tingle is still used, however, being adopted by the player after they are transformed. Whoever becomes Tingle will automatically don the green and red suit associated with the character, and become dependent on rupees to survive. Without rupees, Tingle will die. The game also suggests that, like Link, the person who becomes Tingle is bound to the role by destiny. Interestingly, it seems Uncle Rupee may have gotten his name as a result of a bad translation. In the original Japanese version of the game, he is known as Old Man, or Grandpa Rupee, suiting his appearance. It's possible that the translator didn't notice a single character of his name, which changes the word from Old Man to Uncle. The game also includes a wide number of references, such as the boss fight with Captain Stalfos having a top screen similar to that of Nintendo's Punch-Out cabinets in arcades. Even the game's combat system is similar to an earlier Nintendo game, The Frog for Whom the Bell Tolls, another title that we've covered on this channel before. Making this even more interesting, The Frog for Whom the Bell Tolls was actually a game which had its engine adapted for an earlier entry into the Legend of Zelda series, Link's Awakening. This means that Rosy Rupee Land pays homage to the predecessor to an earlier portable Zelda title. We'll talk more on the game's localization and release after we explore the next Tingle adventure game on the DS, Ripened Tingle's Balloon Trip of Love. Irozuki Tingle no Koi no Balloon Trip, or Ripened Tingle's Balloon Trip of Love, was released exclusively in Japan in 2009. Unlike Rosy Rupee Land, where the game centers around money, Balloon Trip of Love is all about women. Just like in the previous title, the game begins with the player taking on the role of a regular 35-year-old man. Whilst watching telesales on his TV, he learns of a book known as Ripened Valiant Heroes Balloon Trip of Love, a novel following the story of a hero who leaves his parents to fall in love with a princess. He purchases the book at the discounted price of just 2 rupees. However, when he finally opens the book, he's sucked inside and transformed into Tingle. His goal, and only means of escaping the book, is to have a dance with the princess of the book's world, the primary goal of the title. While in this mysterious world, Tingle becomes acquainted with 3 characters reminiscent of those found in The Wizard of Oz. Kakashi, a friendly scarecrow, Biruki, a surly robot, and Lion, the cowardly...
Wow, it's literally just a remake.
Each serves different gameplay roles, with Kakashi capable of fitting into small spaces and using straw to prod at things, Biruki being able to kick objects or analyze them using her robot skills, and Lion being a coward though immensely strong, who has a good rapport with animals. With their help, Tingle must solve puzzles to progress, making his way to the city where Tingle and Co. can all have their wishes granted to them. An additional and central gameplay element of the title is romancing various women. Tingle must form relationships with girls throughout his journey, gaining their affections by showering them with gifts, with each one having their own specific tastes. These gifts can both be purchased or found throughout the game. Unlike the previous entry in the series, Balloon Trip of Love plays more closely to a point-and-click adventure game, with the gameplay being almost exclusively played with the stylus. The player must simply tap objects on screen to interact with them, solving various puzzles and making use of their inventory to further the story. Similar to Rosie Rupee Land, the game makes several references to other Nintendo series. During page 4 of the book, an expired bottle of juice can be found in a spooky abandoned house. If Tingle chooses to drink it, he will have a sudden upset stomach, running from the house to the invincibility theme from Super Mario. On page 6, a minigame can be played which pays homage to Super Mario Bros. 2, including a character select menu of the same style in which the player must pick vegetables and worms from a field. The character of Lovia, who teaches Tingle how to win the affections of women as well as sell him various gifts, is dressed as an angel, similar to that of Nintendo's Pit. His theme tune is also somewhat reminiscent of Pit's as well. At the end of a dungeon minigame, a victory dance is displayed which has Tingle appear as he does in Majora's Mask.
What is on their
and
butts?
It's really bloody creepy. The robot crew who operate the Orbital Industries shipping center
like Chibi
are
Robo.
almost exactly the same in appearance to that of Chibi Robo. There are also many more throughout Tingle's adventure, so we shan't name them all. While the first iteration of the Tingle-centric games did receive a release in Europe, the second did not. And to top it off, neither titles made their way to an American audience at all. The reasoning behind this has never been officially stated by Nintendo,
I don't think it would be
fan
received
speculation
well.
is that the sexualized themes of Tingle could have lent themselves to caution on Nintendo's part. It's also no secret that Tingle has often received a negative response by American audiences, even being acknowledged by Zelda director Eiji Aonuma himself. After all, this is the reason that Tingle never appears in Twilight Princess. Though many would argue that the negativity surrounding the character is mostly in jest,
looks like Doom.
And in some ways, it plays into the character's role within the Zelda series. With that said, Tingle's Rosie Rupee Land had an official poll on Nintendo's website, asking players whether the title should be released to American audiences, with the results swinging, arguably surprisingly, against a release. The fact that Nintendo felt the need to create the poll could be seen as an attempt to gauge a real response on people's feelings towards the character, and the idea of a game centered entirely around him, asking players if they thought he was interesting enough, whether he was considered funny, interesting,
I like how all
boring,
the answers
or
in the
annoying,
screenshot
and even
are
how people would react if he appeared in the then upcoming mainline Zelda game, Twilight Princess.
Give us Mother 3.
Seeing as Balloon Trip of Love has even more of a sexualized central theme, primarily involving Tingle flirting with women in order to gain their affection, it's unsurprising that Nintendo were reluctant to consider a translation and localization overseas. This second title didn't even see a release in Europe, despite the first entry making its way to the continent, though this could also suggest that Rosie Rupee Land was released in Europe as translation work had already been underway, with the expectation that the game would be released in the US. As audiences had voted against the release in the US, the English translation could still be put to at least some use by launching the game within PAL territories. A fan translation for Balloon Trip of Love was completed in 2017, however, created by several people collectively known as Team Tingle. In 2010, Vanpool, developers of both games, were developing an additional full Tingle title, though the concept was dropped. The game would have been a horror title starring Tingle in the main role, though it was cancelled due to, and I quote, a variety of reasons. However, it could be argued that a horror game with Tingle would be something that would have likely resonated with an American audience more than the
supposed to be hair on their butts
slightly creepy perverted elf man going on wacky adventures to become rich and woo unsuspecting women by showering them with money and gifts. it's not quite fitting with Western values in this day and age.
No.
And now for another unique Zelda game that never came from the West. A GameCube Zelda game within a game. While not a fully fledged game in its own right, 2004's The Legend of Zelda 4 Swords Adventures had an entire additional mode exclusive to the Japanese and Korean releases called Navi Trackers.
Really?
Similar to the main part of 4 Swords Adventures, Navi Trackers utilizes the Game Boy Advance to GameCube link cable to give each of the 4 possible players their own screen to play from, whilst the television is used as a map and shared screen. This screen also shows Tetra and a number of other characters from Wind Waker, who provide the player with fully voiced commentary while they play. This is interesting in its own right, as outside of the Satellaview titles, Zelda games didn't typically feature much in the way of voice acting. With this in mind, players can select their gender, along with 2 Japanese characters as their name, which are read aloud by Tetra in Japanese, which is also the case in the Korean release as well. Taking place after the events of the Wind Waker, players must compete across large mazes to navigate and locate the members of Tetra's pirate crew, whilst picking up stamps or medals along the way, to prove Link's worth as a member of the band of pirates, with the 3 opposing players being other pirates who have disguised themselves as Link. The mechanics weren't actually unique to this game, and appeared in an earlier Japanese exclusive title by Eiji Ayanuma, Marvelous Another Treasure Island. The mechanics in question weren't part of the fully fledged release of Marvelous, but rather a Satellaview broadcast in which players would listen to the radio broadcast while navigating a map to collect stamps. This is known as a stamp rally, a common event for Japanese people outside of gaming, in which they collect stamps during events or when visiting locations across the country. Essentially, Navi Trackers replaces the radio broadcast with Tetra's narration. Not only does this mode play as a 4-player competition, but there's also a single-player experience which pits the player against an AI-controlled Tingle instead. The name Navi Trackers work as both a reference to Link's companion Navi, but also to demonstrate the primary challenge of navigation. That said, the game was once planned to be called Tetra's Trackers when it was announced for the West and first shown at E3 in 2003, alongside 4 Swords Adventures. Both games were previewed as separate titles, though later that year it was announced that both games, alongside an additional mode called Shadow Battle, would come bundled together on the same disc as a 3-in-1 package. The common thread between these games is that all of them would use GBA to GameCube connectivity. However, when the game was launched outside of Japan and Korea, only the main Hyrulean Adventure and Shadow Battle were included. This confused many, as Navi Trackers was originally demonstrated in English, with players choosing an English initial to represent their name in place of 2 Japanese characters. There isn't a lot of information available as to why this game was only released in Japan and Korea, but Nintendo had a tendency to steer away from voice acting in their major franchises, with many finding issue with the extensive voice acting featured in Super Mario Sunshine. Reprogramming many aspects of the game to work with English could have been a challenge in this respect. We've mentioned some similarities between Navi Trackers and Marvelous Another Treasure Island, but it seems the connection between these 2 games may run even deeper than loose inspiration. Marvelous was created after Eiji Aonuma expressed an interest in creating a Zelda game. Keep in mind, this was before Aonuma ever worked on a Zelda title, and is why Marvelous gives off some strong Zelda vibes. But now that Aonuma is the de facto Zelda series producer, he may have gotten the urge to go back to the world of Marvelous. In a Nintendo Online magazine interview published in March 2004, Navi Trackers director Yoshinori Tsuchiyama said the game originated from the desire to make a complete departure from Hyrulean Adventure, which is the main game in 4 Swords Adventures, and incorporate a sense of realism produced by having the game talk to the players through the screen. Aonuma then chimes in, saying, "It all started with an 8-year-old game called Marvelous, which made use of the Satellaview satellite transmission system. In that game, players would collect stamps while listening to a radio broadcast. We replaced the satellite transmission system with the connectivity function, used Tetra's character as the vocal guide, and incorporated the pirates." So Navi Trackers was meant to be a complete departure from the main game in 4 Swords, and upon hearing this, Aonuma starts talking about Marvelous. It'd be easy to think nothing of this, But there's unused assets in the game's data that make this brief exchange very interesting. Within this unused material are various player icons for a blonde-haired boy in a cowboy hat, a character known as Dion, who was one of the 3 main protagonists in Marvelous. There's 4 different colors for Dion, each for a player character, just like the 4 different colors for Link in the final game. There's even data suggesting that the character Gina Rockwell, who is Dion's teacher in Marvelous, originally took the place of Tetra in Navi Trackers. There's an unused background image showing Gina talking to the player, taking up the same part of the screen Tetra does in the finished game. Biggest of all, there's even a full 3D model of Gina which seems fairly polished. Putting all of this together, it seems that Navi Trackers was originally planned to be based on the Marvelous IP, with Gina guiding Dion instead of Tetra guiding Link. But it was reworked into something that would be more marketable, which is ironic considering that this game mode is probably one of the least played Zelda games of all time. Did you also know there's a whole bunch of Mario and Pokemon games that also never came to the West? For more facts on those, check out the videos on screen.
That was very informative. Very informative. Wow. Wow. Interesting. Imagine a Tingle game in the US. Oh my god, that would go so poorly. I can guarantee you. Hey there, thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. If you want to see more of my content, feel free to subscribe. If you want to see even more content, I film all of my videos live on my Twitch channel. Feel free to click the first link in the description. Be sure to follow my Twitch channel and know exactly when I go live. Interact with me live on stream, as well as other people in chat, and see a look behind the scenes on every video that I film. Thank you so much. Bye!